Today, I'm going to give you a 5-step good enough practice for you to use when you're working with children who are not native English speakers and you are not fluent in the child's first language and you don't have access to a speech pathologist who is fluent in the child's first language, or you don't have access to a translator. We are talking about the intervention phase today. The last episode, episode 215, we talked about the assessment, and I gave you free links where you can access speech tests in multiple languages, where you can access parent questionnaires in multiple languages, intelligibility and context in multiple languages. So you have that information on hand. You're done with the assessment. Let's roll up our sleeves and jump into the fun part, which is the intervention. Step 1 in the intervention is we're going to find an error that we see in both the child's first language and in English. When we look for that, we would use, if the child was Spanish speaking, a Spanish test as well as an English test, and we would look using the International Phonetic Alphabet at what sounds are error sounds in both languages. And those are going to want to be the targets that we select. After we select these error sounds in both languages, for instance, if the child has an error with the F, perhaps they're stopping, and they also have an error with the R and the L, perhaps they are gliding, I would select an FR blend. The reason I would select FR blends over FL blends, which are also in both languages, is in our research, we found that if you work on the R blends, you will get the L blends for free. The R is more complex than the L, and it is very similar. So we want to make optimal use of therapy time. Step 1 is to pick an error sound that occurs in both languages, and we wanted in this instance, we said, let's get stopping and gliding too. We're going to pick the FR. Step 2 is to pick a complex speech target. Now, we don't want to pick a singleton, a single sound such as the F, and work on the Fs, and work on the R as a singleton sound, because the research indicates that if you work on an FR blend, you're going to get greater gains. And that's because the clusters are more complex than the single sounds. So you have a cascading impact. The higher you aim, the higher the gains. We're going to select the FR blend, as I mentioned before. I would pick FR over FL, and I plan on getting FL for free based on the research that we've completed. The third step is we're going to treat the target in English. Now, why am I not going to treat the target in Spanish? Because I'm not fluent in the Spanish language. Because I cannot produce that therapy with fidelity, sure, I can get a list from ChatGPT, from Claude, and I can say, give me a list of Spanish words or phrases and tell me how they sound, and I'm going to say them myself. That would not be best practice because you are not speaking the language correctly. You are not providing correct models. You do not know how to trill. You are not producing the sounds correctly. So use the language that you are fluent in. Stick with what you know. So you are going to use English and you're going to pick complex treatment targets that exist in the child's language. Now, this is very important. The research on this is not done yet. So we know, generally speaking, that if you pick on 3-element clusters, that you're going to get greater gains than if you choose 2-element clusters. However, in the Spanish language, you do not have 3 clusters. And in many languages, you don't have clusters, yet alone 3-element clusters. Few languages in the world have 3-element clusters. Would it be better to do 2-element clusters or 3-element clusters? We do not know yet. This is where I encourage you to research your practice. Go ahead and select a 3-element cluster for one of the quarters. See if the gains generalize and that you're getting gains in the other languages. For instance, if you're working on the SKR blends, and you're working on them in English, are you finding that the child in Spanish is stopping less? Is the child not fronting as much and is more able to produce the sounds in the back of the mouth? Is the child gliding less and producing the R sound, singleton sounds? So you're going to see, even though they don't have SKR blends in the Spanish language, I'm getting very nice generalizable gains because the child is reducing the phonological processes of stopping, gliding, and fronting. That's what I want you to think about, is that just because the research, which sounds very official, is not there yet, that doesn't mean that that is not best practice. You really do have to research your own back porch and your own practice and look closely at the gains you're making or not making in DSD. Do something different if you're not making gains, and do something different if you are making gains. That is because when we talk about the research in the field of speech sound disorders, much of the research that sounds very official and very definitive is single case studies. There's less children that you can count on my hand in these studies. These are studies of one child, two children, four children max. So currently there is an NIH study that is funded where they're looking at 16 is the goal, 16 Spanish English speakers, and they're going to randomly assign them and look at the crossover, and they're using complex clusters in this research that's currently underway. We don't have those results yet. That study is not completed yet. So right now we really have to take the little research we have available, and you also have to think about the triangle of what evidence-based practice is. You have to take your own clinical expertise into the mix, and you also have to take the unique features of your back porch. The children you service are likely very different from the children that were serviced in the study. A triangle of evidence-based practice takes all three. What is the published research? We know that. There's some case studies. What is your clinical expertise and your client, their own unique profile into the picture? You put all three together, and then you have evidence-based practice. But I really think when you think about case studies, you really have to put it in its place. And it definitely does not have the definitive word on what you should do on Monday morning. It's a piece of the practice. So the next area we're going to look at is number 4. We're going to look at how can we train the caregivers, or how can we provide home practice and generalization. It's as simple as coming up with a list of sentences or phrases, or even if you want to have simple words that they would use as a core vocabulary in everyday life that you would like them to practice every day that incorporate those sounds. And that would be in their language of Spanish, for instance, if they speak Spanish. So you would ask them to practice it daily, on a daily basis, because the research indicates that frequency really does trump at the preschool level how much you practice. You don't want to practice 2 hours once a week. Instead, it's more preferable to do 5 minutes every single day. We want frequency. When it comes to frequency, you have a little short word list. Think about something they could include within their routine and embed it in their routine and practice it every single day as part of the routine, and it contains the target. In my case, what I do with my SIS membership is I have these paragraphs and I have these sentences, and I will tell the parent, well, here is a paragraph. Practice this paragraph 1 time every single day. It has the complex targets in it, embedded into the bedtime routine, or embedded into the teeth brushing routine, or embedded into your snack time. I don't care where you embed it. I just care that it's something that you're going to do every single day, and you're going to go ahead and post this up on the wall, or post it up on this book, or post it up next to the toothbrush, so that every single day you do it 1 time a day. And that has been very good at expediting the gains in speech sound disorders. The 5th step is we want to check progress in both languages. Now, a lot of people are like, we like to probe on a regular basis, and we like to look at these words that we're practicing and see how they're coming along with that. I actually don't like that strategy, and that's okay. You do you. If you're a prober and every 3 sessions you like to say, okay, how does the child say these 5 words now? Okay, I see improvement in these 5 words. I call that practice effects. I'm very little interested in how well they say words that we said a million times over and over again. I have very much interest in generalized gains. So that's why very quickly, every single quarter, so that every quarter is every 2 months, basically, I give the speech sound disorder assessment, the single word assessment. When I give that assessment, I know the number of errors. That's what I care about. How are we doing? Are we getting a decrease in the number of errors when I show them this phonetically balanced picture book and they tell me what each of those things are? I don't care about the standard scores. I care about, are we seeing a decrease in the errors? And we're seeing a decrease in the errors. I know these gains are generalizing to communication. The child saying spider. They're not saying piter anymore. Am I working on SP blends? No, I'm not working on SP blends. I'm working on the SKR blends. I'm not working on SP blends because that would be an obstruent with an obstruent, which means it's not a maximally distinct sound. Now, what I mean by that is the S is a fricative. The airflow, there's friction to it. The P, it is a stop. The airflow is stopped. These are two very similar sounds I have together. Instead, I want to have a sound where the airflow glides. I would want to do instead, if I'm doing like scrape, I have that R attached to it. With the R, the air is gliding over the tongue. When I combine that S with the R in the same blend, SKR, I am doing acrobatics, Cirque du Soleil in the mouth. That is going to challenge the child's motor coordination. In doing so, we are going to get greater gains because the higher you aim, the greater the challenge, the greater the change. It's just like working out. The brain is very much like the body and how it responds to behavioral interventions. If you go to the gym, and if you challenge your body will change. If you challenge your body less, the body will change less. It really is that simple. The higher the target, the more complex the target, the greater the change, period. When you're thinking about SP, ST, SK, you have a stop next to the XS, which is a friction in the airflow. When we take that S and we put it next to a W in which you have a glide in the airflow, sua, then you're doing Cirque du Soleil in the mouth. You're going from obstructed airflow sound to a glided airflow sound. When you're using an L or an R in that blend, once again, they're called liquids, in which basically it's almost like liquid. It flows, the airflow flows. You can think of that over the tongue. You combine that with an S. We have Cirque du Soleil in the mouth. Challenge creates change. Think about that when you're doing clusters and you're looking at clusters that are present in both language, and that's why we went for the FR. We have the F, a friction in the airflow, a fricative, and we have the R. The R is a liquid where the airflow glides like liquid over the tongue. Put those two together, we have Cirque du Soleil in the mouth. That is something to consider when you're picking those complex blends. You want for the obstruent, those blends that are obstructed to be combined with the glides or the liquids. When we're checking the progress in both languages, what I would like to do is give a single word phonetically balanced word list, or give the single word phonetically balanced picture test that I've shared a link with all these different languages around the world, so you don't have to buy one. And you're just going to look at the number of errors. You don't need the standardized scores. What's happening to the number of errors? If you are using complex clusters, the most complex clusters in the child's language, like what I focus on, you're not going to see gains there. You're going to see gains in a developmental fashion. The earlier sounds will naturally develop before the later sounds. When we are working on complex targets, we do not change the order in which speech develops. That will always stay the same. What we're doing is the child's running up the steps instead of crawling up the steps. The gains are going to occur at a much faster rate the more complex the target. We've researched this already. We've done the randomized groups, and we found 3-element really trumps 2 elements. We're talking you're going to get significantly more gains if you pick a 3-element cluster over a 2-element cluster. When we did randomized groups and we kept everything else the same. So you're going to have to look at your back porch and say, let's compare the two-element FR blend, for instance, with this Spanish speaking child. And let's try an SKR blend this semester, and let's try an FR blend this semester, and let's see which one produces more generalizable gains, not only in English, but also in Spanish. You can't say there isn't research to support that because the research hasn't been done. And the research that supports the two-element gains has only been done on a couple of children. I really do encourage you to respect the triangle, respect the unique strengths and the weaknesses that the child brings to the intervention, respect your own clinical expertise, and respect the research we do have available. And when you take those all three into consideration and you consider them in a critical manner, that's when you're going to optimize your gains. When you're able to explain why, and you're able to explain why on all levels. To close this out, we're not doing best practice. Best practice would be you are fluent in the child's first language. Best practice would be if you're not fluent in the child's first language, you have a translator. But if that's not feasible, we're going to do good enough practice. And good enough practice means that you're going to have to explain why you're doing what you're doing. And what I'm going to encourage you to do is to follow what I've shown you today. Say, I'm selecting this target because it's present in both languages. Or I'm selecting this complex three-element target because I see the child is stopping, and I see the child is fronting, and I see the child is gliding too. There's three phonological processes. And this target looks at these three phonological processes, and we're going to monitor whether or not we see gains at the singleton level. The gains will happen later at the cluster level. That happens last because that's a later on step. So don't expect those gains early on. We don't change the order in which development happens. But you have to explain your why. Why are you choosing this target across languages? How are you going to assess progress across languages? There's one more area that I just want you to consider when we take a step back, because you can get all locked into the language differences and what is going to be the phrase that I'm going to send home to the parent, and what is the test I'm going to use to attest the child's speech, and how am I going to compare the child's dialect, the parent's dialect when they're reading the story. You have all of these details that you're considering. At the end of the day, don't forget best practice speech sound disorders. I don't care who you're working with. And that is to use multimodal cueing. That is to use dynamic tactile temporal cueing. That is, use your body, use visual, use imagery, use slowed crawl speech, use the 80% challenge point at all times, and dynamically cue in which 1 second you might be doing a maximal level of cues, and a couple of seconds later you're not cueing at all, because that's where the child is, and you're present with the child when you're cueing. Just keep in mind when you're considering all of these details, when you're working on speech sound disorders with a child who's bilingual, the big picture. Best practice doesn't change. Best practice, if you're with me, you are using a most to least prompting continuum. If you are with me, you are using multimodal cues. You're using every tool in your toolbox to work on the most complex clusters possible in an accurate manner. If you're working with me, you're dynamically changing your cueing from a moment to moment basis based on the child at that moment in time. Don't get stuck in the details of the leaf and forget the forest. Stay in the forest. And I would argue that when you're working with children who are bilingual, these multimodal cues become more important. This most to least prompting hierarchy becomes more important because you're working with a language that is not the child's native language. Constantly staying at 80% accuracy rate, not going below it to habituate errors or for frustration, is more and more important when you're working with a language that is a second language for the child. All of these principles that we've incorporated is standard best practice when we're working with our native English speakers become even more important when you're speaking with English language learners. Don't forget about the important stuff because you're phoning in on the target and assessing the target, selecting the target, and wondering how can you transfer the target to the child's native language. You've got a lot more considerations going on. But at the end of the day, remember your basics. Remember what works, because what works with what works with native English speakers is even more important when you're working with children who are learning English as a second language. That said, take these 5 steps, put them into practice with your next bilingual speaker. Let me know how it goes, and do what you do best, which is to roll up your sleeves and make the world a better place, one child at a time. You are always going to be first.